let's go deeper into Glenn's question. Glenn asked, what about everything else? So far, we have Rabbeinu Tam, Tosfot, right? The question is planting part of Tosefet Shvit? Rabbeinu Tam seems to think it's not at all. The Yerushalmi, the second answer there in the Yerushalmi, seemed to say that it could have been, but it's not, because by its nature, it's not preparing for the next year. So let's just pay attention to the extreme division here. Rabbeinu Tam says the only thing you're not allowed to do before Shmita, presumably, is plant, right? It's the only thing you're allowed to do is plant, right? Everything else nothing was ever said about anything else. So that's it. Yerushalmi and also the other answer in the Tosfot focus more on the different distinction between plowing and planting, having to do with the question of, is this something that's preparing the Shmita or not? What about everything else? What about weeding? What about other forms of zmira? Right? If I'm gonna mow the lawn in order to make it extend, right? Not during Shmita, before Shmita. That is by its nature something preparing for the next year, or anything else, right? Putting pesticide, which is a problem on Shmita. I can go to definitions right now, but right, it is an issue on Shmita. Is that, what about that, right? I put it in before Shmita, during the Tosefet Shvit. What about all those things? So let's have a look. Page 3, top of page 3. Mizablin, you read this we're going to read this fairly fast. These are all the things you are allowed to do during the Tosefet Shvit. Mizablin, madrin, mikshot, midlot, Rosh Hashanah. So the vegetables you're allowed to put forgetting all of my English. What's wrong with me? You're allowed to put compost. You're allowed to also put small holes that will allow the water. What? Yeah, exactly. Up to Hashanah, in the vegetable patches, right? Mikshad midlot are just examples for vegetable patches. These have to do with care for the tree, taking off, getting rid of pests, putting on, right, using different materials that help get rid of the pests, etc. Taking off bad branches, things like that. We're not going to go into every single example, but that's the idea. Next is Misaklin at Rosh Hashanah, Makil Samim, Mizaldin, Faslin at Rosh Hashanah, right? These are different ways of grooming the tree. And that's the idea here. The main point, we're not going to go into every example here, but the main point here is, right, so if you want to see every single, the explanation of every one, we have the Pirush Mishnah and the Chavot here. But the question is, why is this? In other words, it seems that all these things that do prepare the work for the seventh year are allowed, right? It seems, right? I'm going to put the pesticide in a way that's going to get rid of them for the next 3 months, presumably, right? I hope I don't have to go every day, right? Or etc. Definitely, we're talking about grooming and, right, getting rid of the bad branches, etc. That's definitely something that's a long term, not for today, right? So Rashi says that this is a special heter. Rashi in the Daf Nun says that Rosh Hashanah shel Rav Shvit, אף על פי שעבודות האלה אסור 30 יום לפני ראש השנה, החשש היא שלא ימותו הנטיעות. דהיינו 30 יום מדרבנן הן והאכל לא גזור. So, what does Rashi mean? Hanach 30 yom midrabanan. Are we only talking about Shmi when Shmita is drabanan? Is that what he means to say? But it's not. So I'm going to skip some of the. So there's a bit of a. It's a bit of a strange Rashi. Rashi says Hanach 30 yom midrabanan. Tosefet Shvit is drabanan. 30 yom. The Roman Mashal was doraita, right? Oh, very good. So right. So these melachot, because they're asur midrabanan, Chazal. So I'll be honest. I was a bit torn when I was writing this, and I was writing next unit. Well, not this, number 5, really, 3 and 5. We're going to see that midoraita, the only things you're not allowed to do are zriya zmira. Those are the only things you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to plant, and you're not allowed to. What's the word for zmira? I keep on forgetting. We're saying this the same kind of grooming, right? That we were talking about. What? Pruning? Pruning, is that the right word? Yes, I think so. Pruning, thank you. We wrote it in the English file there. I can steal it from there. Right, planting and pruning are the only things that are Asur Midoraita. Everything else is Drabanan. Now, so during Shmita, you're allowed to do those things that are Asur Midrabanan if the tree will otherwise be significantly affected. Okay, you're allowed to do the things that are Asur Midrabanan even during Shmita itself if the tree will be significantly affected. You can water a tree, correct? We're going to get to that. Yes, you can water the tree. So Rashi says, I think the best reading of this Rashi is, since during Shmita it's only Asur Midrabanan, and even then Chazal said, well, but not if it'll harm the trees significantly. So during Tosefet Shvi, they never imposed the Gzera to begin with.
Does planting also include planting? In other words, uprooting other trees near it? In other words, one of the worst things you can have is have, a lot of little trees sprout up near the tree that you're planting, because it steals all the resources.
Right.
So you usually try to take those away. That's why we have controlled burns and all sorts of other clearings. Because every tree has saplings, and then all of a sudden it starts.
Have a whole,
Right. So you have to.
So that
prohibition of planting also include.
No, it doesn't. No, so not Doraita. Not Doraita. Midrabanan, that's also during Shmita, we'll find it's not brought here. In Unit 5, I'll give you the exact. There's another Mishnah like that. It's one of those. It's in that list. It's a Breita in Moed Katan and Vodazar. Moed Katan, I'm pretty sure. Moed Katan brings all the examples, including that, which is also Draban. So it's also Draban. In other words, we're used to thinking, and we're already preparing you for Unit 5. We're used to thinking of the Shabbos mindset. The Shabbos mindset is, if you're not allowed to plant the tree, you're also allowed to water it, and you're also allowed to groom it, and you're also allowed to, all those things, they're all the same, right? It's all part of planting. Planting means creating the vegetation, creating the tree. And everything else is included in that. So that's the Av and that's the Torah. That's right. But it's all the same, ultimately, right? On Shabbos. It's all Isur Skila, right? Shmita does not work like that. It's hard to change that mindset, but that's right. And why? I think the answer is because Shabbos happens once a week. It's only one day a week. Shmita is a full year. Everything's going to die, right? See, that's what the Rambam says. The Rambam says if everything was Asur Midoraisa, so everything would die. That would not work. We can't have the whole country dying. We need to. So we allow all the things. So the Torah never gave that Isur, but there's still the Shabbat Haaretz aspect, where we want, broadly speaking, you can spend all your time taking care of your garden, even during Shmita, right? Even right, as long as you don't transgress those two deraisas, right? Chazal say no, you can't do that. And more than that, according to many, if you do that, you over on the Isur deraisa of Shavtar Shabbat Lashem. So this works. In other words, if I just put pesticide on once, that's an Isur Drabanan. But if I spend all my time grooming the trees in ways that are not Asur Midoraisa, right? Technically, then I transgress not the Isur of Lo Tizra Lo Tizmor, but I do transgress Shavtar Shabbat Lashem because I'm not allowing the land to just do its thing. So that's where we draw the line. Back to us. So I think the best reading of Rashi is, since during Shmita there's no Isur Doraisa on any of those, so before Shmita you could spend the whole month preparing the land for Shmita. Right? There's no Isur like that. There's no Isur Nadoraisa Drabanan during those 30 days of preparing the land like that. You're only not allowed to plow. That's what it seems, Rashi seems to say. And planting, Rashi also said, right? Anything that takes root, Rashi also said is Asur during the Shmita, right? That's how Rashi explained why am I allowed to plant 2 weeks before Rosh Hashanah, before Rosh Chodesh Elul, because it'll take root after Rosh Chodesh Elul, right? Which implies that Rashi says there are 2 things that are Asur on the Tosefet Shvi, and 2 things only, right? Let's skip over to the bottom of page 3. The Mishnah says, "Mezablin me'adrin b'mikshot midlot ad Rosh Hashanah." The question is, what is the exact difference between me'adrin and cholshin? What is the difference exactly? Right. So the Rosh here says, Rosh Mishans on the Mishnah, בעניין חפירה, כלי ברזל שחופר בידי אדם, כן חורש בשפרים, ועודים לחורשים. Wait, what? It says if you're allowed to me'ader, which is digging around the plants, you're also allowed to plow. Wait, but we're not allowed to plow, right? Kind of, right? Now, Afalgav, don't worry, he thought about that too. Afalgav דחרישה דאורייתא היא ואלה לא אוסרה בתוספת שביעית, שרי להכה אפילו בזמן בית המקדש, כיוון שעושה לצורך פירות שישית. In other words, what's the difference? The difference is when you take your plow and you broadly plow the field, clearly you're doing this to prepare the next crop. But right now I have these vegetables. I'm going to take my ma'adir, my hoe. Yeah, I'm going to take my hoe or my spade. Yeah, any of those, and I'm going to dig a bit around to allow the water to get to the vegetables before Shmita. That's okay. So that's his point there. And once he says this, he goes into all the distinctions. This is on the next page, on page 4. Kama chilukim. Because כל מלאכה אפילו דאורייתא, כגון חרישה, שעושה לצורך פירות שישית, מותרות אפילו בתוספת שביעית. So as long as you can justify that you're doing it for the 6th year's crop, you're allowed to do it, even after Rosh Chodesh Elul. Even after Rosh Chodesh Elul. For example, he has to say that, because otherwise, why would you be allowed to hoe around your vegetable patch during Tosefet Shvi'it? Isn't that charisha? Isn't that plowing? That's also midaraisa. It must be that since it's evident that I'm doing it for the 6th year's crop, it's allowed even during the Tosefet Shvi'it. What am I now doing? I'm going to take the big plow. So he has to say this, right? It sounds like a very big chidush. Say, wait, so you're allowed to plow as long as for the 6th year, even after Rosh Chodesh Elul, not only after Pesach, after Shavuot, which is drabanan. So it's drabanan, so they say right? Even after Rosh Chodesh Elul, as long as it's evident that I'm doing it for that vegetable, that vegetation, you're allowed. So that's the first point. חרישה שאינה צורך פירות, אלא אף לצורך האילן עצמו, אפילו לפני תוספת שביעית אסורה. Right, meaning this, I read that fast because plowing, which is no longer seen as for the 6th year's crop, you're not allowed to do anymore, right? ליטה אילן בתחילה ותוספת שביעית אסור קודם לכן מותר. So planting a tree, right? You're allowed to do it until Rosh Chodesh Elul. וכל הנח מלאכות אשרי נהך עד ראש השנה, אף על פי I'll just point out, this contradicts Rabbeinu Tam we learned earlier, right? Rabbeinu Tam says you're allowed to plant a tree. Ikronit, you're allowed to plant a tree until Rosh Hashanah as well, right? Rabbeinu Tam says there might be other issues, but Rabbeinu Tam says that mitzad Tosefet Shvi'it, as far as Tosefet Shvi'it is concerned, you're allowed to plant even then. Finally, kol hanach melachot ashari nahach ad Rosh Hashanah, or this whole list, Perek Bet Mishnah Bet Advav, this whole list of things you have to do till Rosh Hashanah, af al pi sheyesh behen she'inan letzorach shishit, right? So specifically, idul, we have to explain why is that not plowing. But what about everything else? What about putting the pesticide? What about all those other things? Lo gazur b'tosefet mishum da'afilu b'shvit atzma lo asur mid'oraita. אפילו בשביעית עצמה, במקום פסיידה, גון להשקות בית השלכים, מהשמעתם דשארי, שמתולדות בשביעית לאו דאורייתא ומקודם לא גזור. This goes back to what I explained in Rashi before. Even during Shmita, you're allowed to do these things if harm will come, if otherwise harm will come to the tree. So before Shmita, we don't even make that distinction. Even though it's Tosefet, even though it's the time of the Tosefet. And that's why it's mutar. Let's have a quick look at the Rambam. Let's have a quick look at the Rambam. So because the what I want to show from the Rosh Mishats is 3 points, right? 3 interesting things about the Rosh Mishats. Number 1, he's saying even plowing is allowed as long as it's done for the 6th year's crop, not after Rosh Hashanah, so there, but up to Rosh Hashanah. Any other plowing is asur from Pesach, from Shavuot, so earlier on. Planting is allowed. Planting is not allowed during the Tosefet, as opposed to Rabbeinu Tam who says that planting was never an issue during Tosefet. As we saw in the Tosfot, the 3 pins in the Tosfot all seem to say that planting has nothing to do with Tosefet. And putting aside the Ramban and the Ritva hold like that Yerushalmi and say there's no issue of planting during the Sefer, there's an issue of Orla, which is kind of worse, right? And finally, going back to Rashi's point, I think he says it more clearly. Rashi was a bit lucid there, right? Rashi wasn't so clear. Here he says, right, about all the Melchot Rabbanan that we allow during Shmita to make sure that the land doesn't die, and before Shmita we say even if it's more than that, we just allow it fully. Let's have a look at the Rambam in Peragim and Al-Khatet, and we'll end with this. It says the Rambam, Af Bezan Mikdash. Why does the Rambam say Af Bezan Mikdash? Because halacha before that, the Rambam said, well, nowadays you don't have to Sefer Shvit. Right? You don't have to Sefer Shvit, and therefore you could plow until Rosh Hashanah nowadays. The Rambam goes on and says, Af Bezan Mikdash, Mutar l'sakel l'zabel as-sadot v'la'ador mikshot v'midlot v'dashlachin ad Rosh Hashanah. Even in time of Mikdash, meaning even when you do have to Sefer Shvit, you have to do all these things. So all those things, he writes this whole list. What the poskim pointed out, it's interesting about the Rambam talks about la'ador mikshaot v'midlaot. What did the Rosh Mishan say about la'ador mikshaot v'midlaot? That you're allowed to do it if it's for the, even though it's doraita, right? You're plowing for the 6th year's crop. Even though despite it being doraita, you're allowed to do it if you're doing it for the you're allowed to do it for the 6th year's crop, right? Sorry, anything that's for the 6th year's crop is allowed to be done, even though it's an isur doraita. That's what the Rosh Mishan said. Now, this is a bit of a problem. Why is it a bit of a problem? Because what are we talking about? The 6th year's crop, right? I'm allowed to dig holes around that. I'm allowed to do things that are in essence, charisha, as long as it's for the 6th year's crop, right? Define, what's the definition of the 6th year's crop when it comes to mikshot midlot? Something that? So l'chor you'd say if the vegetables are already there, growing, whatever, something like that, right? What's the Rambam right in the next parak, in Parak Daled Halachayit Bet? That the definition of the 6th year's crop is anything that was picked during the 6th year.
That comes up before.
No, picked out of the land. So it's early. In other words, again, I'll explain. This means that according to the Rosh Mishans, if the Rosh Mishans would hold both of these things, he'd say you're only allowed to plow, or only right. He said even plowing is allowed if it's the 6th year's 6th year's crop. You're only allowed to plow around vegetables that you're going to pick during the 6th year. Or you're allowed to plow 3 days before Rosh Hashanah. Presumably that would not give enough time for your plowing to help the vegetables you're going to be picking next couple of days, right? So the Rambam, presumably, if he wants to say you're allowed to do this until Rosh Hashanah, which is what he says, would have to give some other definition. So we're going to quickly see two answers. I'll just say briefly. The Mari Korkus, who's one of the central commentaries on the Rambam in Zeraim. He's less famous because we don't learn Zeraim as much, but his parish on Zeraim is very central. He says that we're not talking about plowing at all. We're talking about making ruts that will allow the water to go in, and that is not called plowing. It's just not. That's not plowing. It's like digging. So just not plowing. So it's not right. That's the Mari Korkus. Mikdash David doesn't like this because Mikdash David says that anything that prepares the land in that way should be seen also as plowing, right? You're also plowing. So it's secration or something to write down. He says, no, we're talking about something else. We're talking about Glenn said. We're talking about uprooting things that are around the vegetables. So there, and that is not seen as plowing at all. If I'm taking my hoe and I'm making the land, I'm what do you say, weakening the land. I'm making the land more loosening the soil. Thank you, my goodness, what's wrong with my English today? If I'm loosening the soil, that's not really different from plowing. So Marikoku says, well, you're loosening the soil, you're making a hole, you're doing something, you're digging something to allow the water to go in. Because David said, if you're doing that, that's also too close to the Raita. And that's why he prefers explaining that we're talking about uprooting things that are around it. So, but the main point, going back to Glenn's question, right? During the Sevet Shvit, you're not allowed to plow. Now, Chazal took that even far back and said you're not allowed to plow anything. I'm just giving a summary of what we're going to end up with from what is Asur on the Sevet Shvit. Well, 2-minute summary. Plowing, Doraita from Rosh Chodesh Elul, and Chazal extend that to the moment you can't, it's not distinguished, it's not recognized as something preparing not recognized as something that benefits the 60 years crop. Rosh Mishan says, if it's evident that you're doing it for the 6 years crop, you ought to do it even after Rosh Chodesh Elul. Rosh Mishan says, the Rambam would have to say otherwise, presumably, and therefore his heter would be digging a hole for water. Grand Mari Korkus, David, it would be to uproot other disturbing plants. Etc. What about everything that's plant? When it comes to planting, Rabbeinu Tam says it's nothing to do with Sevet Shvit, and it looks like Ramban and Ritva agreed, nothing to do with Sevet Shvit planting. Rashi seems to think it does have to do with Sevet Shvit, including the roots taking root during the Sevet Shvit is a problem. Rosh Mishan seems to agree, and the planting. So it's just that once it's taken root before Chodesh Elul, you're good. That's the Rosh Mishans, and that's about planting. And when it comes to all other melachot during Shmita, we're going to learn they're not Doraita, they're only Drabanan. All other melachot are only Asur Midrabanan during Shmita. So you're allowed to do them if there will be significant harm otherwise. So during Tosefet Shvi'it, Chazal say you don't need to go in that distinction. And you're allowed to do them either way during the Tosefet Shvi'it. So that's